I mentioned that after about 20 years of relying almost exclusively on prescribed burning as our way to move that more closed canopy forest towards a more woodland structure with, canopy gaps that would put enough sunlight on the floor for those, prairie associate species to survive and thrive, we just weren't having great luck of getting them to move out of the power line into the forest. So the partners, we all got together and came up with a plan and decided that we probably needed to start talking about doing a formal timber harvest to put a little bit more sunlight on the forest floor, get some of those off-site species out of here, and kind of jumpstart the restoration of this site. But the big question that a lot of us kind of had and couldn't quite come to an agreement on was, what species do we need to retain? How many do we need to retain? And what should the stand actually look like? What should the structure be once we're finished up with this sale? And those were all unknowns. People didn't keep great records back in the 1800s of what this, kind of woodland looked like. We needed data. And I chose this stop because I want to give some credit to a graduate student at NC State who really kind of, her master's thesis jump-started a lot of the restoration work that we're doing now on this site. So you can see my orange paint. This was put on by my technician and I, Jordan Luff. He's at Vermont now. He helped mark this sale, as well as a couple other people. But this red paint that you see above it, this was put on by Laura Sigmund Chatham, who was the grad student. And she conducted a dendrochronology study on Picture Creek. She had hectare plots and half-hectare plots, hectare and half-hectare plots on this site. She came in and she mapped the locations of the trees, and she also cored in and aged each one of them. From that, she was able to move back in time and figure out when certain species actually moved onto this site, since fire suppression and things like that. So she took the data and she said, okay, what was here 50 years ago? And she found that a lot of the red maple and sweet gum and yellow poplar wasn't out here 50 years ago. A lot of that moved in after fire had ceased on the site. And she decided to go back a little bit further, and she, back about 100 years, and she found that around that time it was mostly post oak, blackjack oak, shortleaf pine, and the species that we figured were out here. She was able to go back, I want to say, about 120, 150 years. That's about as old as she found. And sure enough, what she found is it was more xerophytic hardwoods in certain areas, and then when there were conifers present, and there were a lot of them in some areas, it was shortleaf pine. And what that gave me as the silviculturist on the site trying to develop prescriptions for this project is species composition and a density target, or at least a range of densities. And that's a huge part of the puzzle right there. But then she also had that added benefit of she mapped the trees. So that gave us some really crude information on spatial arrangement. And what we found is that it was kind of chaotic, groupy and clumpy, areas of a lot of trees, areas of almost no trees. And it gave us a target to work with. So from that, we were able to come in and develop a marking guide. And pretty much what we did is we marked all the post oaks that we could on the site. We also tried to mark as much shortleaf as we could, but if we had to take out shortleaf to give the logger room to operate or to create some gaps in areas that were pretty big and closed canopy, we did. We also retained, the occasional beech tree just for diversity, so we didn't eradicate anything from the site except for maybe loblolly and sweet gum. But, we went out of our way to kind of just create a structure that better mirrored what the data that her dendrochronology revealed was just a little bit more accurate on the site.